Just trying to make sure.
Send that out. 6:30. So, here at 6. 6:30, go into the lobby, turn right.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our debate this evening. My name is Robert Kranak, and I'm a professor of political science here at Colgate University. I'm also the co-director of the Center for Freedom and Western Civilization, which is the sponsor of our debate today. And it'll be my pleasure to introduce our guest panelists, Anson and Robert, and also to introduce the topic very briefly and the rules of our debate. The topic for the debate is ESG policies in corporate America, and I think this topic is familiar to many of us in general terms, but the specifics of it are often elusive, technical, and somewhat confusing, even though it's very, very important. And most of us have some direct experience of it in different ways. But in general terms, to slightly oversimplify, and I'm sure that our guest today will try to clarify all these issues, is that ESG, the terms for which stand for environmental, social, and governance policies in corporate America, is basically about making investment decisions, whether for business or for pension funds or for retirement accounts. And the sort of the basic question which we all kind of get on some level is the question whether investment decisions should be made primarily for material reasons to maximize profits for shareholders, or should those investment decisions include other factors pertaining to social policies and values of different kinds, such as the impact on the environment, the impact on social justice, on DEI issues, governance issues, and if you push it a little bit, you might even say it's even related to the so-called BDS issue, boycott, divest, sanction pertaining to Israel. Most Colgate students actually will be faced with these decisions in the world of your future careers, whether it's in business or NGOs, or even over your personal retirements. Or perhaps you might even go to work in Washington for a regulatory agency, such as the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which has gotten quite involved in questions of transparency regarding ESG decisions of different companies. So it's both, I think of it as both a technical issue and one that's very personal and direct and in a way commonsensical, which, to repeat, knowing Colgate students and your future careers, I'm quite sure that all of you will be encountering this, and some of my students have even spoken to me in their summer internships, where they've already faced these questions in their summer jobs. So our speakers today, I'm really happy to bring them here, and they will try to show us how complex these decisions are and what these terms, environmental, social, and governance actually factors really mean. And they'll debate the pros and the cons of ESG policies. Let me briefly introduce the guests. The first one is Anson Frerichs, is the co-founder and president of Strive Asset Management, which he founded 15 years ago with a guy named Vivek Ramaswamy. You've probably heard of him, who's become quite controversial and provocative in the presidential Republican primary, and you're free to ask him questions about that during Q&A. What's this guy really like? Maybe Anson can give us some insights about him. I think we're all kind of curious about him. Anson's experience is in creating innovative business strategies and leading results-oriented teams. Prior to founding Strive Asset, he led finance, sales, and marketing operations for Anheuser-Busch, and then began his career in private equity. He received his BA from Yale and MBA from Harvard Business School, and he will be drawing upon his wealth of experience in business to explain problems with ESG. Our other debater and panelist is Robert Eccles, and he is a leading authority on how companies invest and can create sustainable strategies through the integration of environmental, social, and governance factors in resource allocation decisions. The focus of Robert's work is on how capital markets can contribute to ensuring a sustainable society for generations to come. Currently, He is a visiting professor of management and practice at the Said Business School at the University of Oxford, where he's engaged in research projects focused on corporate purpose and corporate reporting. He has also been a lecturer at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and for most of his career, he has spent his time as professor at Harvard Business School for about 30 years, and he retired recently from that position. So I think we have really two great people here to discuss this topic, and very qualified, and have a lot of experience with it, and can explain it to us in relatable terms. My final comment, by way of introduction, is the simple format that we'll be following. I've asked each of our speakers to give a 15-minute opening presentation, laying out their broad position, and it'll become clear who is defending and who is criticizing ESG at that point. That'll take the first 30 minutes. Then we'll have 30 minutes of exchange sitting at the table. I'll basically moderate the debate between the two and ask some provocative questions or get them arguing with each other. And then finally, the last 30 minutes will be Q&A from the audience, and we'll have one of our student assistants helping with the microphone. And of course, after that, a number of you have been invited for dinner afterwards down at the Colgate Inn, and if you have any questions about that, you can ask me afterwards. So please join me in welcoming our guests for this very important and controversial topic, ESG factors in corporate America.
One just quick note before we start. You mentioned that I co-founded Strive with Vivek 15 years ago. It feels like 15 years. It was actually 2 years ago. We work with Vivek. It's kind of a lot to deal with on a day-to-day basis, as anyone who's following along can probably attest to. So my name's Anson Frericks. Thank you very much for having me here today. Very excited to be on campus here. And at least from an outsider's point of view, I'm in the state of Ohio. It seems that we're going to do something revolutionary here today, which on a college campus have just an open, I think respectful, civilized dialogue with two folks with different views. But I really appreciate everybody coming out and hopefully sharing. And at the end of the day, hopefully having an open mind and hopefully learn something today. So I'm going to talk about the topic of the day, which is, has American capitalism gone woke? And taking a specific look at our environmental, social, and governance factors. Are they helping businesses or not helping businesses? Now that's a broad topic. And before I start, I actually want to go in and set the framework for this. I actually want to define what we're talking about today. There's three things that I want to define. First is American capitalism. Second is the word woke. And then third is environmental, social, and governance. Because these are all three very sort of like opaque, kind of nebulous topics to discuss. It's not like there's a single definition of all these things. Like if I asked everybody in the room to define what this chair is, I would hope here that 90+%, hopefully 100, but I'll at least say 90% of the people could say, it might have two legs on this, it has a back, it has a front. But these topics are very complex. So I'm going to start with American capitalism. So this is pretty interesting. So I'm a firm and ardent believer in American free market shareholder capitalism, which is very distinct from a movement that is known as stakeholder capitalism that has entered the U.S. market over the last 5 or 6 years. I'll come back there in a second. So what is American free market shareholder capitalism? Well, the actual history of it goes back about 100 years. There's a Supreme Court case. It's Dodge versus Ford. And there was the Dodge brothers. They were competitors to Henry Ford, both car manufacturers. The Dodge brothers actually owned 10% of the Ford company. Henry Ford owned most of the rest. And the Dodge brothers sued Henry Ford because Henry Ford was making a ton of money in creating cars for the American public, American people. And instead of returning that money to shareholders, he said that he was going to burn on opening more factories or giving higher wages to folks or other things that weren't necessarily in the best interest of shareholders. With minority shareholders, they sued. They said that you have to act in the best interest of shareholders. Supreme Court agreed, and that's what started and kicked off as American shareholder, free market shareholder capitalism, where the purpose of a corporation, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is, what is the purpose of a corporation? Who is it supposed to serve? And I believe it's supposed to serve shareholders. Now, that was codified really in the 1970s. There's somebody named Milton Friedman. Does anyone study Milton Friedman know who Milton Friedman is? So Milton Friedman in the 1970s wrote an article about what is the purpose of a company. and it was in the New York Times, and it's still quoted 50 years later. He says basically the social purpose of a corporation is to make money for shareholders. That's what he said. Now, at that same, over the next 50 years, you take a look that America's unleashed incredible prosperity with this notion of American free market capitalism, where companies, they're going to go out and create new technologies and computers and the internet and now AI, return those profits to shareholders. And why is that good? Because when companies, they're actually creating new products and services, they end up getting more consumers. When they get more consumers, they get more revenue. When they get more revenue, they can hire more people, they can invest in more technology, they can scale their business, pay more taxes, and then they can do all the other things in terms of paying people that can then drive charitable giving or drive anything else they want to do. So going back to the 1970s, there's another movement at that exact same time that was popping up known as stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism was popularized by a guy named Klaus Schwab. Does anyone know who Klaus Schwab is by chance? So he started the World Economic Forum. Davos, we hear every single year, there's all these CEOs that fly into Davos and they wax and wane about sort of the latest climate issues or quality issues or equity issues in the whole world. This whole conference was by named Klaus Schwab. He was a European economist. His view was that the purpose of a corporation was to serve stakeholders. That a business has the responsibility not to serve shareholders, but it needs to serve all stakeholders in a community. Those can be government people, those can be unions, those can be activists, those can be the environment. He says the purpose of a corporation, all of its profits and everything it does, should be to abide and to serve all stakeholders. Now, I have a problem with that fundamental tenet of stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism says that it's going to do two things superior to the shareholder model. One, stakeholder capitalism says that it is going to produce better investment outcomes and better investment returns. And two, stakeholder capitalism says it's going to lead to better societal outcomes. And I co-founded the company Strive with Vivek because, frankly, we took issue with both of these tenets of stakeholder capitalism that have started to emerge in the U.S. really over the last 5 years. We'll get into this in a little bit, but effectively, it's been adopted, this stakeholder capitalism model, over the last 5 years because you have a lot of European governments that manage a lot of money with their sovereign wealth funds, plus states like California, states like New York, that have all of a sudden pushed this stakeholder capitalism agenda on some of the largest wealth advisors in the United States. JP Morgan, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, that collectively manage over $20 trillion of assets, said if you're going to manage my capital, we want you to adopt stakeholder capitalism, which we believe will, again, create better investment outcomes, better societal outcomes. And this was sort of and a lot of the banks here in the U.S. will get into it, but they did it to apologize for things like the great financial crisis, the Occupy Wall Street movement, after Donald Trump came to power and pulled out things like the Paris Climate Accords in 2016. A lot of these institutions put more pressure on the whole stakeholder capitalism movement. In 2018, 2019, something called the Business Roundtable here in the United States. They was led by Larry Fink at BlackRock, JP Morgan, and Jamie Dimon to get all corporations to abide by this stakeholder capitalism model and kind of change their purpose from shareholder value to stakeholder value. The fallacy with this is, with stakeholder capitalism that I have is, again, there's two things that purports to do better investment returns, better societal outcomes. Disagree. If you take a look at broad-based U.S. equity market returns, that's like the S&P 500, like the 500 largest companies in the United States, over the last 40 years in the United States, they have produced superior outcomes to the largest companies in Europe in terms of equity market returns, stock market returns. U.S. on average has returned 10% per year, whereas their European counterparts have returned about 7% per year. So that's a difference of 3% per year over a 40-year time period. To put that into perspective about what that does, let's say you have a retirement account, you have a $100,000 retirement account that you're investing for the next 40 years. If you were getting a 10% return compounded annually over 40 years, that means you'll have $4.5 million when you retire. If you're only getting 7% a year over that 40 years, you have $1.5 million. So you're talking about almost basically a $3 million delta that you're going to have in a retirement account due to the compounding interest. So that first tenet of stakeholder capitalism producing better societal outcomes, that falls apart. And then if you take a look at a broad-based prosperity metric, the stakeholder capitalism says, well, even if you give up and sacrifice some of your returns, well, maybe we'll have more equity, more equality for people. But just take a look at the U.S. versus Europe over the last 40 years. And if you look at any broad-based prosperity metric, GDP, per capita income, inflation rates, unemployment rates, patents produced per capita, the U.S. trounces Europe over that time period in terms of all of those global prosperity metrics. So that's the reason why I believe that American free market shareholder capitalism is a superior capitalist philosophy to this stakeholder capitalism model. But right now, there's a big debate that's going on in the United States. Park that for 1 second. So again, that's how I define American capitalism, American shareholder capitalism, separate from the stakeholder capitalism model that's been coming in. So park that for a second, and now let's talk about the word woke. Because again, we're talking about has American capitalism gone woke? So I'm going to try and define woke in the most neutral terms that I can. Hopefully we can generally agree on sort of a framework for woke, because I bet if I ask you versus you, what the word woke means, I'm going to get a different definition from everybody. This is how I'm going to define it. So being woke means that you're alert to these invisible and alleged injustices in society that are due to inherited genetic characteristics that people have. Based off your race, your sex, your sexuality, there is a hierarchy in this country. In short terms, if you're a white male, you're at the top of the hierarchy. If you're transgender, black, female, you're at the bottom of the hierarchy. And what that does is that leads to this idea that there's an oppressor class and an oppressed class. And the way that the woke movement works is that they say that to fix these historic injustices and this imbalance based off of these immutable characteristics people are born with, that the oppressed class has to fight, and that we need to rectify the situation, not through political issues and through the political process, but also through capital markets and economic process. We need to address and somehow reverse and flip this pyramid, or at least make people equal on the same footing. We do that with things like putting in quota systems at companies and organizations. You have to hire a certain amount of this person or that person. Or there can be certain programs and certain privileges given to certain people based off these immutable characteristics that they have. And this also goes towards things even from an environmental standpoint. Companies are supposed to address a lot of environmental issues, because a lot of environmentalists and people will say that it's a lot of times the people that are on the bottom of that hierarchical pyramid that are most affected by things like climate change or environmental issues. That's how I define what woke is. I'm not going to get into if woke is good or if it's bad. We can talk about that later. But that's what I will describe or define what being woke means, is that now corporations and others, they have to rectify and justify and solve all of these historical differences and these invisible grievances that folks have. Now, how does that relate back to what we're talking about today about ESG? Well, ESG, and I'll define this, the two, I'll say the broad extremes of what ESG is. ESG simply stands for environmental, social, and governance factors that corporations are supposed to look at as risk factors to manage the business. And I'll say there's the lowercase ESG, environmental, social, governance, where some companies, they look at ESG as just 3 of 300 plus risks that you have to think about when you're managing a business. If you're a bank, you have to look at interest rate risk. You have to look at liquidity risk. You have to look at customer deposit risk. You have to look at global macro risk. And then, of course, you have to look at, okay, maybe some environmental risk. If there's you're giving a loan to somebody that might be polluting the environment, they might not be able to pay that loan back because they could be sued for certain reasons for polluting. Or there might be a social risk, giving money to somebody that's employing child labor or breaking laws. These are just 3 of many risks that are out there. I used to work at Anheuser-Busch. We said there was an environmental risk that was, hey, if you're going to be brewing beer in South Africa or in Mexico, you need to make sure you have water. That was an environmental risk that you had to take a look at. That's what I would say is sort of the lowercase ESG. The way that I define ESG and why ESG has been so problematic is what ESG has become. It is the importing of contested public policy objectives into corporate America that deviates companies from their underlying mission about what they are actually supposed to do with the agreement with their shareholders. Let me use an example of this in context. So there's a company called Apple. Has everyone heard of Apple before? Everyone knows Apple? Got a cell phone. I see a couple of Apple computers that are out there. So how does ESG and how does ESG force companies to do things that are different from their mission? Well, they do it in 2 ways. One is through shareholder proposals. So there are large asset management companies, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard that I mentioned. They control $20 trillion worth of capital. They're the single largest shareholder of 95% of the 500 largest companies in the United States. They tend to vote and control 30 or 40% of the actual votes in companies. And they do it not using their own money, but they use it using money from probably folks in this room, your parents, 401k accounts, pension fund accounts, other accounts. And what they do is that they vote on what are known as shareholder proposals that come up at companies every single year. Shareholder proposals, anyone who is a shareholder in a company can put in what's known as a shareholder proposal. It says that, hey, we at your annual board meeting, we want you to take a vote on this issue, and if it passes, the company has to. Well, Apple, 1 year ago, there was a company, or there was a nonprofit organization called Color of Change. Color of Change is a nonprofit organization. They have a mission that says that we want to stamp out systemic racism and white supremacy in the United States. So, great, noble mission, this is the United States, this is, you can do whatever you want for a nonprofit, great noble mission they have. Well, they go to Apple, they buy $25,000 worth of shares of Apple, and they put up a proposal that says, we want you, Apple, to figure out how you've contributed to systemic racism and white supremacy historically in the United States, and what you're going to do to solve it moving forward. Well, what's interesting is that when these shareholder proposals come up at companies, the board of directors at Apple, they can recommend shareholders vote for or against these proposals. So Apple, who's run by Tim Cook, gay male, generally pretty liberal, Apple's board relatively liberal, says, hey, I understand what you're trying to achieve, I understand this proposal, but we at Apple, our mission is to create magical devices at unbelievable prices. Whatever Apple's mission is. We just don't deal with systemic racism and white supremacy and addressing these issues. That's just not part of the mission of Apple. So we're trying to achieve, this is not about shareholder value. This is a stakeholder value concern. This is about stakeholder value. We're going to recommend against this racial equity audit. Yet, then all of a sudden, you have these large firms I mentioned, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, that have adopted the stakeholder capitalism model as recently as 2018, 2019, so 4 or 5 years ago. They used to shoot down 95% of these proposals that were called ESG proposals. Environmental issues, social issues, they weren't in the best interest of shareholders. But since they've adopted this stakeholder capitalism model, they are now voting for almost 50% of these proposals. As recently as 2 years ago, almost 50% of these proposals. And lo and behold, even though Apple's board of directors said we don't think it's in the best interest of the shareholders, the actual Color of Change organization agreed not in the best interest of the shareholders. This proposal passed by 52% to 48%, with BlackRock being the swing vote, the second largest shareholder of Apple, on 6%, and they voted for this proposal. Now Apple's conducting a racial equity audit, costing tens of millions of dollars a year, having Loretta Lynch there for reviews, and we don't believe this is I don't believe this is in the best interest of shareholders. And that's how we've gone from this stakeholder movement adopting what is so-called woke ideology that's trying to address these invisible grievances that folks have. And all of a sudden that's being imported into corporate America. And it's not only through these shareholder votes, but it's also then you have these large organizations, BlackRock, State Street, again, through shareholder engagement, they will tell other companies that said, hey, we were able to make Apple do this racial equity audit, so therefore we're going to vote for these affirmatively at other organizations as well if you don't proactively start doing this. And there's other issues related to not only racial equity audits, but there are all types of environmental issues, talking about having companies reduce emissions. There's issues with having companies support unions. There's issues with, even this year, at Starbucks, PETA. People know PETA, the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals. They told Starbucks that we don't want you to have cow's milk in your restaurants in here, or in your stores in here, because we think that's bad for the environment. There was a lot of people that actually supported this. And so when I say, has American capitalism gone woke? Well, if you're a believer in American free market shareholder capitalism, like I am, companies are supposed to act in the best interest of shareholders. That's their purpose. Yet now, you have large asset management companies that are the main owners of companies that have this stakeholder capitalism model. And this stakeholder capitalism model has adopted an ideology where it is, companies are no longer going to be focused on their core mission, doing what that is, creating great products and services. But now there's a progressive environmental social governance agenda that is being placed on them, where now they are supposed to solve issues that are better left to the political process, where every citizen can vote on these issues. Then I would say yes, at this point, American capitalism has gone woke, based off what I've seen companies get involved in that is not congruent with their mission and not congruent with actually creating one shareholder.
So just in case you didn't notice, he's the right-wing guy. I'm the left-wing guy. I live in Massachusetts, in a town that probably votes, I don't know, 90% Democrat, in a bad year. I'm an aging hippie, and I wanted to be the first speaker. So I said, Bob, I'm the oldest. We should be the first speaker. Bob said, with respect, Bob, Anthony went to Yale, and he was a political science and history major. You went to this trade school called MIT. So I think we'll start with Anson so he can lay out the big picture, which I think he's done very well. Shareholder capitalism, stakeholder capitalism, important laws that have been passed, another definition of woke. I've learned there's small letter ESG, there's capital letter ESG. I fundamentally don't buy his premise, okay? And we'll get into that. And I'll just give you a couple of statistics. I had to write this down because I don't trade in the markets. But I know how to get on my Mac and do that sort of stuff. So Anson's concerned about this woke capitalism taking over America. Probably isn't very good for the stock market. So the low over the last 5 years, on March 20, 2020, S&P was 2,300. Today it's 4,337. Dow Jones Industrial Average was 19,173. Today it's, as of 2 o'clock, 33,851. So empirically, I don't see, what these effects are happening. But maybe they just haven't had a chance to play themselves out. Here's another statistic. Very nice paper done by a finance professor from the business school and some other folks. When you look at the top 5 executives in the S&P 500 from the proxy by pay, 69% are Republican, 31% are Democrats. So Anson, I got to tell you, if woke capitalism is taking over America, man, it's happening on the watch of your guys, not my guys, because it's like 2 to 1 in the executive suite. So that's kind of my response to Anson's basic thesis. But I'm supposed to talk about the ESG part, because that's what Bob told me to do. He said, Bob, kind of stay in your swim lane. So I'll tell you what I think ESG is, even in capitalism. And I'll tell you what I think it isn't, which is being sort of, reported by I think the crazy one. I don't think they're crazy. I think they're reasonable. Right? I think the Freedom Caucus and Jim George's, so I'm clear. And I'll tell you how things are going with this anti-ESG campaign from the right. So the term ESG actually goes back to 2004. There was a report that was published by the UN Global Compact called Who Cares Wins? It was financial institutions. And it basically said, these environmental, social, and governance issues are becoming more important. Things are happening in the world. So we need to pay attention, and they didn't use the word material, but it's like we need to pay attention to these issues from the point of value creation. Now it's interesting, and I will say this in fairness, it kind of blurred the line between sort of ESG integration, which we'll talk about, and impact, right? And I think that's a lot of the contested domain, which is important. Contested domain. So there's 123 references, and for the longest time, nobody was paying attention to ESG. What's ESG? I don't know. It's kind of bad. It's like philanthropy. I don't like it. What ESG is basically about material risks that matter to value creation. There's something called the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. I was the founding chairman of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. The brainchild was in A.G. Rogers. We basically created a classification system of 11 sectors, 77 industries. And, through engagement with companies and shareholders, what are those things from a value creation point of view that matter, that a company needs to manage? And it's largely from a risk point of view. And on average, it's about 5 or 6. So there's about 24, 25 kind of topics that come over those ESG. And the thesis was, okay, pay attention to these things. It's good for shareholder value creation. When the ESG culture war started, in a way I was kind of happy because I've been sort of toiling in the dark for years. ESG, nobody cared, right? But now I've got Republicans going after ESG in a big way. So it's like, my gosh, I can finally be relevant after 71 years on this planet. Maybe there's something that I could do. And I remember this is how we met. I wrote a great piece called Grift Capitalism. The GOP's brilliant strategy for ripping off ordinary Americans. It's fabulous. And I mentioned Strive. And said some nasty things about Strive and Vivek. It was great fun. And, Anson writes me on LinkedIn, says, maybe we should talk. We don't agree on everything. We'll just have a chat. So, that's actually how we got to know each other. It's been fun and interesting. But he's not the only Republican I know. So as a result of that little paper, I get an email from a friend of mine named Dan Crowell, who's a Republican I've known for 20 years. Works for a law firm called Kano Gates. He writes me, he says, well, I read your piece. Quite frankly, I'm disappointed. It's beneath you. You're simply adding fuel to the rhetorical fire. Why do you want to piss on Kevin McCarthy? Because he's going to be the Speaker of the House. Well, he was for 7 days. And the Supreme Court is irrelevant. Because I said the Supreme Court was wrong. Yay, gun laws and that. So I wrote it back. I said, I didn't start this fight. I'll tell you. I didn't think Vivek started the fight. It's 2 of them. So he knows it. Nothing I can do about who's going to be the Speaker of the House. Kevin doesn't know me. If he did, he wouldn't like me. And let's put the Supreme Court aside. And he goes, Bob, if you can find one Republican that thinks sustainability is important, you back up. I said, sure. I said, Bob, here's what you need to understand. When you say sustainability to a Republican, they think AOC, Green New Deal, Europe, Marxism, and they don't like it. I think about it that way myself, but that's how you guys think about it. Okay. Dan says, look, I think sustainability is important. We have a role to play. So we wrote a piece. Our first piece together was in the Harvard Law School Former Corporate Governance called Turning Down the Heat on the ESG debate, separating material risk disclosures from salient ethical issues. And again, that's really sort of the important part of this debate. And we talked about sort of what happened in terms of legislation, what happened with Dodd, and you kind of get down to what's very controversial in terms of the Securities and Exchange Commission, which has issued a disclosure rule, which is quite controversial. Then we wrote a piece for Harvard Business Review called Rescuing ESG from the Culture Wars. Then there was a big brouhaha that happened when the Trump administration changed language from the Biden administration, changed language from the Trump administration to something called the Resident Fundamental Term of the Security Act that has to do with ESG. And then the Trump administration basically didn't use the word ESG because they didn't want it to be politicized. And they said it has to be pecuniary material. And to be honest, my crowd just flipped out. I mean, they just flipped out. I mean, look at what the Trump administration is doing. So then Biden comes in and he changes the role to economically relevant, and his crowd flips out. Okay? And I'm like, it's really the same stuff. So with another Republican, to bipartisan policy center, we write a little piece that says it's time to take the politics, out of ESG and investing. Because essentially what both rules are, slightly different language with the same meaning, is material risk factors. So for me, what Anson is concerned about with the capital ESG, as I said, I don't really see that happening. If anything, the people that hated ESG first wasn't his guys. It was the extreme of my guys. They don't like ESG because it's only about value creation. They are concerned about the positive and negative externalities, and so they're like the true stakeholder capitalism people, which I actually don't subscribe to. And it's kind of unclear what it really means in practice anyway. I mean, I posted something on LinkedIn. It's too complicated to explain. Let me just say, it is the most hate mail I have gotten in my life. And it's from the left. Oh my God. So I have a millennial friend that they're called trolls. And you can block them. So I had someone help me learn that because I'm 72. I don't really know about social media and trolls and stuff like that. So I wrote a piece called The Topology of Hate for ESG. And you've got sort of on my extreme the sustainability Taliban. You've got on your extreme the sustainability flat earth. Then you have, and so we have some agreement, the opportunists, sort of like making ESG be a lot more than it is, funds, ESG funds, that they charge too much for, that don't do the things that they're claiming. ESG investing, it's complicated, we'll get into that. For me, it's ESG integration. So there's some problems with ESG, and then you get this kind of culture where it starts. And I think Vivek's book is part of it. And on May 26th of last year, Mike Pence writes an op-ed piece to the Wall Street Journal and he said ESG is this pernicious strategy of progressives trying to accomplish in markets what they can't through the political process. And he rails on, we talked about this before, he rails on about the engine number one. Follow that engine number one, which is kind of activist manager, and the proximity process. They put 3 directors on the board of ExxonMobil. He goes, they are undermining the company from within. That's pretty serious. So, like, if they're environmentalists, 3 environmentalists on the board of ExxonMobil undermining the company from within. Who are these people? Well, actually, what they are is that they're people that have got experience in the oil and gas industry, which had never existed on the board of ExxonMobil, which had an imperial combined chairman and CEO, who was making resource allocation decisions to do more drilling in the wrong places that wasn't return on capital. If you read the business plan, it's not to force ExxonMobil to be net zero, it's basically the business case. Their credit rating had been downgraded twice, they were kicked out of the Dow Jones, all kinds of problems. So they go and they put 3 people that actually have experience in the oil and gas industry. The board of ExxonMobil have been like just, fabulous looking board, white people, black people, all these different industries, CEOs, ex-CEOs, knew nothing about the business. So one of these guys is Greg Goff, who I got to know through the person that was in engine number 1. And who is Greg Goff? This environmentalist that was put on the board of ExxonMobil to undermine the company from within. Greg Goff had a career at ConocoPhillips before he became the CEO of an oil and gas company, or one of the top 100 CEOs by HBR, is a Republican who lives in Texas and gives a lot of money to the Republican Party. So he and I have a little joke about that. Got me pretty well. I've done an interview with him about climate change and stuff. So there's this disconnect between a lot of this anti-ESG rhetoric going on, what claims are making that have no basis in fact whatsoever. So let me tell you how this anti-ESG campaign is going for these folks. Well, there's been, over the past year, this has been entertaining, about 165 bills in 23 red states, anti-ESG bills. We're going to boycott boycotters because, BlackRock, BlackRock boycotting oil and gas companies, they've got funds that don't have them, they've got funds that have them. 24% of those bills have been passed in these red states. 24% of 165. Talk about wasting, kind of time and energy. They tried to pass a bill in Wyoming. Every single business group, banking group, including the Petroleum Association of Wyoming, opposed the bill because they basically said this is economically ineffective. You're going to reduce our choices. You're going to put these constraints on us. Florida. Here's where it gets crazy. Ron DeSantis, not going so well for Ron DeSantis, trying to ride the anti-woke, anti-ESG wave of the president. I think Vivek's reading it once, and Vivek is leveraging this better. He passes this ESG bill. I read about it, this law firm. It's the strongest anti-ESG bill ever. My crowd's like flipping out. Oh my God, did they finally get a strong anti-ESG bill for this big state of Florida? And it's something like, an act to combat corporate activism or something. So I read the summary by this law firm, Simpson Thatcher, and I don't read what the bill is. I wrote a piece that I finally got published in the Wall Street Journal that I'm doing in my life. The bill is fine, right? It's like pecuniary material factors. And so, good, it's just like with ERISA, okay? It's pecuniary material factors. And the hilarity of it is that when he passes this bill, there's this place on the website. Governor DeSantis passes strongest anti-ESG bill, taking woke out of America, big picture of woke, flying through it and stuff. It's like, it doesn't do anything like that. It's like every site has their boogeyman, right? This isn't the death of ESG, the way my crowd was thinking about it. It didn't kill woke, like, your crowd might be thinking about. Well, 2 minutes. And we'll have it. So there's these attorneys, so the attorney generals have been very busy, including people in the House. So these attorney generals have been very busy launching lawsuits because they're lawyers, and that's what lawyers do, especially in America, launching lawsuits. We have the highest per capita lawyers in the world. We have more litigation per capita in the world. We're like really good at litigation. So they sued the Biden administration over the change in this ERISA rule that I talked about. It goes to, and then the people that were sort of defending it wanted to get it moved to what they thought was a friendlier jurisdiction, and that was turned down. So it ended up going to a federal judge, a conservative federal judge in Amarillo, Texas, not Austin, which is kind of the woke people like me. Amarillo, Texas, and he threw it out. He said, "There's no basis in this whatsoever. The rules are basically the same." And I'm thinking, Tim Doyle and I had it right, but nobody paid attention to West. Had to go through the lawsuit, all the way up to this federal judge. Really cute story, and one last thing, substantive. So, Nancy and I talked about this a little bit. I became aware of, Alaska, the Attorney General of Alaska was very proud to sign on to this bill that was led by the Attorney General of Texas, the Attorney General of Florida. Oh, by the way, as an aside, there's a conservative climate caucus that has 81 members, that's got 12 from Texas and 6 from Florida. So Alaska comes out with their first sustainability report. And it's quite a good and thoughtful report. It talks about we've got a lot of natural sources, it's important to the people, we need to do this responsibly. They talk about the sustainable development goals, which is all about making the world a better place. They talk about social impact. They talk about eliminating poverty through economic equity. They hired an ESG and sustainability consulting firm to help them put it together. Got a little bit of a shout out from one of the guys at this consulting firm saying, in the last 6 years, Alaska's been a leader. And then the governor feels that he's got to spend 2 paragraphs in his opening letter explaining, well, none of this has anything to do with ESG. And I'm like, this is crazy, right? It's like you're all about sustainability and impact, and ESG isn't even that. It's just the integration of the risk factors. And you've got yourself in such a knot that you're like rubber man because of that stupid, anti-ESG stuff, plastic. I've had a number of meetings on that with Republicans. And it's very interesting because when you have these meetings in private, and you're not talking to the crazies, like the Jim Corners and Jim Jordans, talk to people on the House Financial Services Committee, it's a very constructive, it's a very civilized conversation. You agree on some things, you don't agree on other things, and I'm learning from this. My little tour of my GOP outreach campaign, the political process. There's at least 2 levels, right? There's the political theater level, which you see in hearings, where people are kind of playing the base, and they get their 30-minute YouTube, the second YouTube thing, and take it back. Then there's the constructive conversations. And here's my question on ESG, and I'll stop. The Republicans have gotten a lot of mileage out of this by riling up their base by saying we don't like ESG, and their base doesn't even know what it is. The liberals like it all. The Democrats get to look like the adults in the room because they're saying, well, we think it's important, the company should disclose their material risk factors and stuff. I don't know that either side wants to agree, right? The Republicans had 19 bills in the House Financial Services Committee, they took them down to 4, and they were written, my Republican friends tell me, in ways so that they were not bipartisan and passed, maybe they were marked in the ground. Here's my prediction. I think ESG will remain sort of a topical thing in this language, probably through the presidential election. And my guess is it's an important thing to be talking about. I think it's going to go like this. Because, people are now reading into this kind of whatever they want to read into, from the left and the right, whatever their ideological perspective is. And I think, as a concept, as a useful thing that's going to move us forward, the issues in the world that we have to deal with, I think the answer is no. So, thanks.
So at this time, what I'd like to do is give Anson a chance to respond and pose a question to Robert, and anything you would like to say in response to his comments, and after you speak for, let's say, 5 minutes or so, then I'd like to hear you once again reply to his reply, and then we'll open it up to Q&A from the audience, okay? So your opportunity to respond to anything that you said. I might jump in to clarify a few points, but go ahead.
That's pretty good from MIT trade school guy.
No, thank you.
That was good to know.
Make sure you're talking to your mic.
He was also a jock. He was like a visionary.
Yeah, very good. Make sure you're talking to your
He's younger. He's got a lot of advantages.
So that was good. That was good. No, it was very, very thoughtful, very well laid out. Two things that I'll probably speak to. One is related to use the word sustainability. I want to kind of talk about sustainability. And then the second piece as well is just talking about real life examples. I think you opened up a lot talking about the stock market, what the price was in 2020 versus where they are now. Is this really a problem or not? So those are the two things I'm going to talk about. Let me talk about the second one first, because I think one of the real interesting topics that I have a lot of background on is on Anheuser-Busch. So prior to co-founding Strive, I was the president of Anheuser-Busch here in the United States. Is everyone aware there was a campaign that happened earlier this year, Bud Light, Dylan Mulvaney, that was an issue. It actually dovetails on the sustainability piece. And so it's really interesting, as a real tangible example. So Anheuser-Busch, their mission is to create a future with more cheese. And the brand Bud Light, it was supposed to be easy to drink and easy to enjoy. And because it was supposed to be easy to drink and easy to enjoy, it was shared equally by people who were Democrats and Republicans, and it was the most popular beer brand in the United States since, I think, 2003 or so, and then it did a 20-year run, and then over the summer, it was dethroned by Modelo. And Bud Light is no longer the most popular beer brand in the United States. And this happened due to this campaign that Bud Light had with Dylan Mulvaney. They had Dylan Mulvaney, who, if you don't know who Dylan Mulvaney is, very controversial figure, and it's right now, there's probably no more controversial topic, or one of the most controversial topics in the United States as it relates to the rights of transgender people in society. Should you allow, for example, biological men to compete against biological women in sports? Should you allow gender affirmation care for kids under the age of 18? It's a very fraught political topic, something that Bud Light had never waded into in its history. Bud Light became the most popular brand because it was for people who enjoy football games and backyard barbecues and music festivals, things that everybody enjoyed, whether you were black, white, gay, straight, trans, who cared. These were the things that people enjoyed the brand. Yet when Bud Light got involved in this issue earlier this year, all of a sudden, you had millions of consumers that stopped buying the product. That led to the loss of billions of dollars of shareholder value. So when companies get involved in these issues, and these Anheuser-Busch I know very well, lost billions of dollars of shareholder value. This was a company that prior to this happening was trading around $70-something a share. It's currently around $50-something a share. So it's lost 20% of its value or so, and all of its competitors, Coors and others, they're up 20% of this time period. Stock market's either up or flat around this time period as well. So if you were an investor in Anheuser-Busch, you lost a ton of your actual worth in that company because they got involved in a very fraught political issue that I tied directly back to the ESG movement. Why do I tie it back to the ESG movement? Well, when I was at Anheuser-Busch, did an annual engagement survey every single year. In that annual engagement survey, they would ask questions like, Are you proud to work at this company? Do you understand the mission of the organization? Are you planning to be here in the next 12 months? And how is Anheuser-Busch doing on our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives? And at the end of 21 and beginning of 22, right before I left to go down Strive, got our annual results back. And that year, 50% of the people said that they were going to be leaving the organization in the next 12 months. 90% of people said that, hey, the company's doing fine on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Yet, I really think the CEO of the company put a meeting every single week for 2 hours for top executives, including myself, to focus on. You think it was on, what are we going to do to have 50% of people that are about to leave stay the organization? Or do we need to increase our D&I score from 90 to 95? You would think it would be like, hey, we're going to get people to stay at this company, this is a burning platform, burning issue. But it was the opposite. It was, hey, how are we going to increase our D&I score from 90 to 95%? And this isn't due to some internal thing. This was due to outside pressure from the BlackRock, State Street, Standards of the world, forcing these companies to report on their progress in these initiatives because they have the annual report, now it's an ESG report that reports on their progress on these things. And so all of a sudden it's like, all right, what's everyone going to do? Hey, sales team, all right, go hire more women. All right, marketing team, go try and get a better corporate quality index score by trying to reach more people that historically have been maligned in the beer industry, whatever else it might be. And all of a sudden that ends up with the Illinois Baby campaign. And ends up not only with the campaign, but with a company that's paralyzed after the fact that cannot either A, apologize to consumers that were caught fratting out of touch by the VP of Bud Light, which should have, the first thing should have done. Second, they were unable to even admit that this campaign was either a mistake or to stand by the campaign. They didn't need it. The company literally froze. They haven't fired the person who was responsible for it. They haven't apologized for telling consumers fratting out of touch. They haven't even addressed the issue of if they're going to stand by Dylan Mulvaney or if they're going to say that this is a mistake. And as a result, they've had both people on the left that have left the organization because they feel like they didn't stand up for Dylan Mulvaney. You have people on the right that stopped drinking Bud Light because they feel like now this is a brand that doesn't represent what it historically was. And in the process, again, you've lost billions of dollars, and you have a company that's now in a downward death spiral, laying off people, will be shutting down breweries, and that to me is not sustainable. So going back to like sustainability, and this is a little bit of a definition of sustainability, but Bob talked about this a lot, was what I think the most sustainable thing that a company can do. Most people that would say on the right, or people that believe in American share for capitalism like I do, the most sustainable thing that a company can do is focus on its consumer. Give that consumer excellent products and services. Again, when they do that, that means they're going to get more consumers. They're going to generate more revenue. It's going to allow you to hire more people. It's going to allow your business to thrive. You can build more buildings. You can be more involved in the community. You can do all the things that the ESG community wants you to do anyway. But you're not going to be able to do that if the company is constantly forced off its mission and constantly alienating half of your population by getting involved in issues that you should not be getting involved in. So, on those 2 points, Bob, I was going to maybe ask you a question. Sure. Like when should companies actually get involved in let's call these contested public policy objectives? And there's tons of examples over the last couple of years. You recall that companies like Coca-Cola, Delta, got involved in Georgia Voting Rights Act, because that's asked for people to have an ID to vote. There's obviously the famous Disney example with getting involved in rights issues. So we'd love to hear that. When should companies get involved? These contested public policy issues. What's it good for this, for sure?
So it's a really good question. I'll answer it and I'll talk about sustainability. I want to just give you a little bit of good news, which I think I shared with you before. As I said, I live in Massachusetts, and we mostly drink wine.
See, I'm going to Ohio, Bob. It's like 50% of the people there.
It's like if I want a beer, I'll go to Columbus, Ohio.
That's it. Get into where the people are.
I can meet Jim Jordan. I wrote did you see my piece I wrote when I replied to the letter to Jim Jordan? I didn't get it. Did you see that?
I don't think so.
I'll also do that. So if you could get it to him, you should probably I don't think he's going to do that. So, and if we drink beer, we prefer craft beers or like imported foreign beers, like from Venezuela.
You're not a Bud Light guy?
I'm not a Bud Light guy. I mean, I think it's terrible beer. But we had a little get together, with the people across the street who's an MIT professor, so we were like to hang out together, and he was serving Bud Light. So there's not a lot of us who are old who don't drink a lot of beer, but it's like it's a political statement. I mean, this is why it's so crazy. I think your example about Bud Light is good because I think that has nothing to do. I mean, the fact that the CEO, if you looked at what the SANSB says of material issues, for an alcoholic beverage company, That wouldn't be on the list. It's responsible drinking, it's going to be use of water, it's going to be consumer labeling. It's not trying to, go from 90 to 95 on some kind of a sport. On your question, it's a really, I think it's an important question. I think it's a more important question than the CSG debate. And I'm still thinking about it. But right now, my position is that they shouldn't. Okay? And the person who's been most thoughtful about this, who I mentioned, is a guy named Leo Strine, who was the former Chief Justice of the Delaware Supreme Court, who said he's elected like me. But he's written a very thoughtful paper on this, because the argument is you're not going to have a homogeneous employee population. Left, you're going to have people on the right, you're going to have people in the middle, you're going to have people confused. So for a CEO, a distinction between, it's a distinction without a difference between the CEO's point of view and speaking to the company. I don't think that distinction works. And so when a CEO is making a public statement and representing the company on a political issue, I think it's problematic. And what Leo recommends is that if you're going to do that, it needs to go through a pretty careful process, through the board of directors. And I think you need to take into account, what the consequences would be, for shareholder value. But as a general rule right now, having CEOs kind of make political statements and take political positions, I think that's very problematic.
Can I just ask a question about performance studies? Have you engaged in performance studies which have measured the difference between companies which follow ESG investment and companies which do not, and show that there is a clear difference between the two? Can one systematically prove the case one way or the other based on actual performance of the investment strategy?
So that you kind of come
In other words,
down,
empirical evidence
Yep.
that proves it one way or the other.
you're asking me the numbers question because I didn't want to.
I'm asking because it would seem like it would be a very decisive point to clarify and prove in order to make the case one way or the other.
So you confounded two things a little bit. There's like company performance and investment performance. And it's a little bit easier to do the studies on company performance, and I've done some. And it depends on what you mean by ESG, right? So if you mean by ESG, not that they've kind of, and I think Anson sort of sees more political dimensions in the shareholder proposals than I would, but if you say, okay, it's not that, it's the material risk factors as defined by SASB. I've done some studies with Joe Serafin, people have done more that says, yeah, you don't have performance. Then you get people saying, we can't replicate this study, fair enough. Because, you're under the impression this way, you're under the impression that way. It's even harder, on the investor side, because what is an ESG fund? Is it something where, okay, we've excluded tobacco and oil and gas, is that an ESG fund? Is it an impact fund? We need to distinguish between ESG integration and impact in relation to sustainability. So what you find empirically is there have been a ton of these studies, and it's basically people pick and choose the ones they want. Because you can alter the portfolio, you can alter the time frame, you can define an ESG fund whichever way you want to. So I think until there is an agreed upon definition, so we're looking at ESG integration, we've agreed that these are the material risk factors, we've got better ways of getting the data, because data's a problem, because you're getting proxies, because you're going to have standards, companies to reporting on this stuff. I think it's going to be sort of a great way for professors to get tenure, but I don't see any empirical resolution of this in the near future. But that answer, would you agree with that?
No, I would actually agree a lot with that. It's kind of like a fool's errand to go and try to figure out our ESG fund's going to underperform. And there's kind of two reasons for that. There's a reason I kind of frame more the stakeholder capitalism, shareholder capitalism kind of debate, because here you have 40 years of data, and you can clearly see broad-based performance of the American way of doing business versus the European way of doing business. And the European way of business is really to think about like the ESG view of buying the stakeholder capitalism view. Whereas the term ESG didn't even exist until the year 2005. Because the United Nations worked with some of the the teachers fund in Europe to come up with some investment framework for how businesses to work more closely with society. They came up with ESG. Didn't really go anywhere for a couple of years. Then you had the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009. This whole movement named Occupy Wall Street kind of popped up that said, hey, all the banks got bailout, all the little guys got screwed. What are banks going to do moving forward to kind of repair their image and make sure that everybody gets to participate in the economic benefits of society? That's when you first, from like the 2011, 12, 13 timeframe, this whole idea of ESG kind of initially bubbled up and popped up, and we started seeing it in the financial kind of world and acumen. And then even a lot of ESG funds. One of the reasons why there weren't a lot of ESG funds initially is you ran into what was known as this fiduciary conflict. That most asset managers and pension funds, they have what's known as the sole interest. They have to invest for the sole interest of maximizing shareholder returns. So codified the law, and therefore that has prevented a lot of pension funds and asset managers from importing their own values into somebody's retirement portfolio. Because you give people money to invest and say, hey, just give me basis return. Well, I don't want you divesting from maybe oil and gas, but you have your own personal view on that. I don't want you divesting from tobacco or alcohol, whatever values, judgment you have. I would prefer you just to maximize the value of you. And so during this sort of the time for a lot of funds, they had struggles with ESG. Could you do it? Was it legal? Was it not? That's one of the reasons even this whole stakeholder capitalism movement even popped up, because it almost validated these ESG funds that were forming at the time. And one of the things that Wall Street saw is these ESG funds, you could jack up fees by like 3x. So the average ESG fund, you're going to pay 3x for it versus a non-ESG fund. And now there are a lot of these greenwashing claims that are going on, where effectively there are all these companies from Goldman Sachs to Deutsche Bank to a lot of the large major banks these days. They have actually been fined by the Securities and Exchange Commission for what we call greenwashing, where they said they were giving you an ESG fund, but they really had no parameters or no justification for this being an ESG fund, besides slapping an ESG label on it, maybe taking out like one oil company or one this company, but doing nothing else, but charging people 3x. And generally speaking, this is just known as modern portfolio theory. So if you want to maximize your returns in the stock market while minimizing your annual volatility or the annual risk that you have, modern investment theory or portfolio theory says you want to have the largest number of assets in your investment basket as you possibly can. Because there's certain years that internet stocks are going to do well, and certain years that oil and gas stocks are going to do well, certain years consumer stocks do well for whatever reason. And if you don't have all of those stocks in your basket, then you're going to be missing out on potential return opportunities. So when I think about ESG, if you're going to just by definition be divesting from certain industries, or you're again going to be pushing companies off the mission, by definition, modern portfolio theory, you're going to be missing out on stock market returns. And I think that's generally a theory shared even now by a lot of large asset management companies. You have Vanguard CEO. Vanguard is the second largest asset management company in the world. After BlackRock, their CEO last year came out and said, quickly, ESG investing underperforms just broad-based investing because of these constraints that it puts on the portfolio. State Street, the third largest asset manager, their CIO said, this is a chief investment officer, said, I talk about ESG for clients that want it, and I said there's risk, and that when you put constraints on a portfolio, you're most likely going to underperform versus just broad-based non-ESG investing. And even earlier this year, Larry Fink, who's the head of BlackRock, said he's no longer going to use the term ESG because it's become too politicized, because it means too many different things. And so therefore, I agree with Bob, generally speaking, I would say that either A, ESG underperforms if you take a look at a lot of studies that are out there, or if you take a look at a lot of the nomenclature coming from top asset managers now, and then even if you wanted to, to show that it outperforms, you can share the data if you want to. It's a very limited time frame, really over the last 5 to 10 years that we have the ESG funds to use, which from an investment standpoint is not really a long time.
But I would agree, here's the problem with language. When you define ESG investing as basically negative screening, the portfolio consequences you have a right. That's not how I define it. I define it as the integration of material risk factors according to Sanskrit. It's interesting in terms of, so, and I think, I'll pile on to your argument in terms of ESG funds. So they were overhyped. And the claims, so there's this confounding between ESG integration, free shareholder value creation, and impact. So impact is positive and negative externalities, things that, like climate change. So you have these ESG funds, and it's like, okay, here's the Save the Planet from Climate Change fund. Man, that's good analysis. For children, or grandchildren, so what's in the fund? Okay, it's a bunch of FANGs, right? 70% FANGs, there's no oil and gas stocks. And I'm like, okay, so the FANGs have got their own issues. And not holding some oil and gas stocks, that does nothing. It does absolutely nothing, for climate change. But then here's where this problem of the politicization is taking place. You've got the right claiming that the left is doing this exclusion, right? And it's for a political purpose, even though they're not excluding oil and gas stocks. They say they're excluding oil and gas stocks for a political agenda. Then you've got all these bills that are being introduced in the House to say asset managers can't invest in Chinese stocks. So when I've had meetings with people on the Hill, with Republicans, that said, you guys crack me up, right? On the one hand, you're saying you don't want this political dimension. What's more political than saying asset managers can't invest in Chinese stocks? I have all kinds of problems with China. But not using the capital markets. It's like an investor from a fiduciary duty point of view, they want to take the country risk. Now you've got most recently, and I think this is a very interesting and important question, you've got red states and blue states that are buying Israel to support Israel. And I'm all down, as you know, we talked about supporting Israel. But when you're basically imputing a political objective, in the assets that you're owning, then I think it's where it becomes problematic. Here's my question for you. So you talk a lot about the 3 and what percentage they own this and that. They have a fiduciary duty, to their clients, to the beneficiaries. And so what I guess I just don't see is, and they have these proposals, and some of them are better than others, but they're precatory, which means that they're voluntary, and you can choose to follow or not. I just don't see, and you kind of said this in yourself, you said what's happened with the Big 3, I just don't see the political intent in their shareholder proposals that you do that's trying to spread the stakeholder capitalism. And I think it's, and neither you or I are there, when they're having their conversations to decide whether to vote their proxies. So I think determining intent, and recognizing they also have fiduciary constraints, that's why I'm kind of less concerned about that.
Yeah. No, this is the data that I see in this, where 2 years ago, when we started Strive, I mentioned this, of the ESG, of all the ESG proposals that come to companies, again, asking companies to reduce their oil and gas output, asking companies to racial equity audits, asking companies to do immunization audits, PETA asking Starbucks to not use milk anymore.
Which is nuts.
It's not, because again, that's not about, shareholder value, it's about a political issue.
And I'm a real man, I do whole milk.
Whole milk, of course.
Not whole milk, not almond milk, not coconut milk, not even half. Milk. No, I do whole milk.
And wash it down with raw eggs. I know. I've seen the way the committee is. But this is the issue. So 2 years ago, those 3 asset managers, they were supporting 45 to 50% of new shareholders 2 years ago. We launched Strive because our big differentiator is we look just at that sole lens of maximizing value. China thinks we should come back to as well. Now this year, in response to Strive and a lot of the pressure we put on it, and really having a real intellectually honest discussion, are these votes in the best interest of shareholders or is it about stakeholders? Now this year, most of those BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, they only support about 7% of the ESG proposals this year. So what I asked them is, how are you guys maximizing value 2 years ago, voting for 45% of the ESG proposals? Yet this year you're only voting for 7%. So are you maximizing value then, or are you maximizing value now? Because you can't really have it both ways. And I think that's the piece where I call into question what their real intent is with this whole stakeholder piece. And once we have the intellectual conversations, and we do a lot of writings in the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg and going to Fox News, all these different places to have this debate, I think a lot of people, they started wrestling with their head and saying, what is the purpose of corporations? And that's where I feel there's a little bit of.
And that's really the fundamental debate, the purpose of the corporation.
Yeah, yes.
Can we turn to student questions now? You're working your answers in when you reply to students. Max has a handheld mic and he'll be going around. Please raise your hand right now if you're interested in asking a question, and we'll start with 3 student questions at least before we turn to faculty and other people. Make sure you speak into it so we can all hear you, and we are recording, so we want the people to be able to hear it on the recording to pick it up. Excuse me.
Sure, thanks.
Speak right into it.
Thank you both for your insights into the debate. So it seems clear that pro-ESG investment restrictions are playing a role in the growth of ESG funds in America and in their existence, and that could drive higher fees, right? But what about unrestricted foreign sovereign investment? If you take, for example, like ADIA, right, the largest foreign investment fund that doesn't necessarily tolerate those fees as much. Are those foreign investments large enough to keep non-ESG funds alive in the United States with increasing wokeness, or do you think that those non-ESG funds are kind of going to die off over time?
Did everyone hear the question? Do you want to formulate it in a way that people can... I didn't quite understand the question. Can you formulate it in a way that I fully understand?
Do you think that non-ESG restricted funds are numerous enough to continue to allow for non-ESG directed investing?
Sorry, so just so I understand the question, it's do I think that non-ESG funds are large enough to sustain themselves, or I think that everything is going to go to ESG?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So, and this is the fact, if you take a look at like BlackRock, the $10 trillion, only about 2% of their assets are actually ESG specific funds. 98% of them are in so-called non-ESG funds. That to me shows you where the actual market is, and people tend to put their money where their mouth is, especially when it comes to their own retirement dollars. Most people don't want ESG. The problem is BlackRock, it's not greenwashing that they're doing, it's actually what I call green smuggling. It's when people, they have these money and they don't think is an ESG fund, yet BlackRock is voting all of their shares in a pro-ESG manner, and they're actually doing engagement in this pro-ESG manner, where they have a 100-person engagement. It's on their website, it's very clear. They say, we've engaged with 3,000 companies, and they have very clearly listed out like E, the S, and G topics, what they've engaged on: diversity and inclusion, emission reductions, everything in the ESG complex. They'll tell you, like, by company, what they've actually done. So I actually think that's the bigger problem, is this green smuggling piece where people think that they're just having their money maximized value-wise, yet with the stakeholder capitalism movement, you're going to have companies that are not going to be as profitable, they're not going to be about shareholder value, they're going to be distracted doing things like unionization audits and racial equity audits and trying to get milk out of their supply chain and all these other issues. That's not going to generate what we call the 10% returns year over year that we have been accustomed to in the United States over the last 40 years. And we already have a retirement crisis in this country. Most pensions are 80% funded. Most folks in this country are, they have about 2 weeks worth of money in the bank. So therefore, all of a sudden, we are going to have to decrease the expected rate of returns in our pensions, and we'll continue to be underfunded. We're going to continue to exacerbate the retirement crisis that we have if we allow this sort of stakeholder capitalism or green smuggling or greenwashing kind of movement to enter into the U.S. And I think most people, when they speak of money, they just want something that's going to maximize the value of their dollars, and then they can donate their money to whatever cause they see.
Would you like to comment on
No,
this question? The next question then. Make sure you speak right into the mic so we can hear you.
I want to thank you both for being here again. I really appreciate your perspectives. As someone who took 6 months off as a sabbatical to be a private equity associate, one of the things that I noticed was that there's a larger ESG push coming from the lovely folks at McKinsey and BCG, and talk about the wonders of Michael Porter's creating shared value. Do you think that ESGs come more from like the board directors and from the actual stockholders, or does it come from like consulting companies saying, hey, here's how you can go and kind of create a new vision for yourselves?
I have a strong view on that, Bob.
So I'll be real quick. So I chair what's called the Sustainability Expert Advisory Council, KKR. And KKR is really quite active in this. And you can look at their sustainability report and the line, which is all materiality. And they don't have to do any of this. And McKinsey and BCG aren't telling them to do this. And the argument was a big piece of the Financial Times by Sarah Murray. When you look at private equity, they control these companies. And they've got a 2 and 20 fee structure, as you know. So 2% of the assets under management, 20% of the ups. and they're masters of the universe, and they want to make a lot of money, and their LPs want to make a lot of money. So when I look at private equity, I go, gee, if these people are looking at board diversity, climate change, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, or whatever they're talking about, they have no incentive from the point of view of the return they're going to get on the exit of this, and to continue to raise money from the LPs. I don't see them as, and I don't think Ganson's worried about it. Probably doesn't exist in America, but let's assume it exists in the public markets. I don't even see that the incentive structure is there for it to exist in the private markets. But you work in private markets, so what do you think?
Yeah, so I actually 100% agree. The big problem is actually a lot of the consultants. And they have a lot of incentives to actually, whether it's ESG, DEI, et cetera, where they've kind of created this problem, this narrative, so they can go in and they can consult with companies and get a ton of fees. One of the most famous studies, we have a whole white paper on our Strive website, you guys can take a look at if you want to, but McKinsey did this famous Diversity Matters and Diversity Wins study. They started the first one in 2014, they did another one in 2016, 2018, where they did what I would say is a very poor job from a research standpoint, where they cherry-picked a lot of data and a lot of companies that frankly already were performing well financially. And the companies that are already performing well financially, they have the resources to go in with a diversity program and whatever else is over there. So McKinsey first did a study in 2018 or 2014, and it was this big seminal study talking about how diversity wins. And that's when you had this sort of DE&I sort of complex that first started coming out, because all of a sudden McKinsey's selling stuff to corporations. It's like, hey, let me sell you these, $1 million consulting project about how I can make you more diverse, more equitable, more inclusive. And by the way, your stock price is going to go up when this happens because look how diverse Google is, and it's just more of a fact of low interest rates, and companies like Google and Facebook were making a ton of money, and their stock prices were growing, and they had the ability to invest into a ton of people and make diversity. And it's funny, when they replicated the study in 2016 and 2018, they used completely different data sets in completely different companies. And we have this all on our website, all very clearly laid out. The data points overlap is they were not able to replicate the original study results they got in 2014 and 16 and 18, so they had to use overlapping time frames, different companies, different countries, everything else. But the punchline of the whole study is that there actually is no correlation between more diverse companies and outperformance from a company standpoint. And there have been studies that have been done at Harvard, Stanford, et cetera, that effectively confirm this, that actually there's more diversity comes after they're already successful and after they're doing well. That's just because they have more resources to hire. Now, am I against diversity for the sake of being against diversity? No. Of course, I want diversity of thought. I want diversity of viewpoints. I believe more in meritocracy, though, in terms of getting there. I think there are more than enough qualified women and minorities in this country that people need to go out and find. But the idea of just putting in forced quota systems that McKinsey is going to sell you a long-term contract on, I think it's disingenuous and it's intellectually dishonest, but I think that's what's driving a lot of this initiative.
Next question.
Thank you both again for making this very approachable as well, putting this in terms that people can understand and keeping the debate. I think a lot of the conversations we've had have been about for-profit companies. So I kind of wanted to turn and ask about the employment of ESG in nonprofit organizations and kind of hit it. Is it smart for them to remove investments in areas that go against their mission values? For example, my mom's at a Massachusetts hospital. They refuse to invest in gun manufacturing and firearms industry. Or alternatively, is that for nonprofits, is that a not wise goal for them? If the goal of the fiduciaries and the nonprofit is to get returns from their investment that they can then use to invest in their missions. So kind of on that.
Yeah, great question. Who would like to reply first? Please speak into the mic.
So it's a really good question. I wrote a paper with a law professor named Joe Fish called The Politics of Values-Based Investing. And in a sense, you answered your own question at the end, because it depends on whether there's a fiduciary duty on the part of the people, that are sort of in charge of the fund. And if it is to maximize returns, then I think it's highly problematic when you make exclusions. But people can invest their money however they want to. on whatever screens they want. There's a Point Bridge America First ETF in MAGA. Invest your Republican values, right? And they screen companies if they're Republican enough. Actually has some clean energy companies, so I was pleased to see that. I'm fine with that, right? You know, it's like, it's truth in advertising. And so if the people whose money is being managed have given, you know, approval to say, you know, it's our money, and these are the benefactors, and, you know, we're comfortable with the decision to exclude whatever these stocks are, then it's perfectly fine, it's their money. But if there's a fiduciary obligation, then I think it's problematic.
I actually agree with that. At the end of the day, it's about disclosure. There's folks in this room that you might be Catholic, you might be Muslim, you might be Jewish, whatever it is, and even from a religious standpoint. A lot of people, if you're Catholic, they want to say, hey, I want to be in stocks and companies that are more pro-life, or if you're Muslim, there's Sharia law, and you have to invest from certain companies that are in the lending and loan business. And at the end of the day, it's your money. You should be able to invest it however you want to. And if you're an organization, you're a nonprofit, you have an endowment, and you know, let's say the mission of that endowment is to help the health and wellness, and therefore you don't want alcohol or tobacco. That's a big part of the mission. No problem. You should have BlackRock manage your money, or have one of these other organizations manage your money. You know, what we've done at Strive is we just said that we look for sole lens of value maximization. If you take a look at BlackRock, 98% of their money is in theoretically value maximization funds, but they don't act that way. Turns out they don't. They do corporate governance. That's what they most people are. But yeah, if you want the model fund, you know, if you're Donald Trump Jr. or whatever else, go for it. Go for it. You know, that's your money. You can do that. And if you're AOC and you invest in climate action, that's this fund. Well, okay, it's your money. You can do that too. But just don't do that with other people's money. Make sure you ask them how they want to invest in it. And that's should hopefully be investigations.
We have another question, Max? 2 minutes.
Thank you. My question is from Mr. Fricks. I wanted to ask about Levesque, and do you think that he had political ambitions when you co-founded Strive with him? And more importantly, do you think that his desire to be president is genuine and realistic? Or do you think that there's maybe underlying motives underneath his campaign? Thank you.
Yeah, so I would say
This is being recorded.
Yeah, that's great. No, I'm a total open book on this, and so I've known Vivek for, 25 years. We went to high school together, we were high school buddies, we did mock trial together, that's how we originally knew each other. And then we were always kind of like in the same orbits and spheres for the last 25 years, went to similar schools and similar cities, and always kind of kept in contact. And somebody asked me this question recently. I always said, like in high school, I always said he was more likely to win a Nobel Prize than he was to be president. But even when we co-founded Strive, because he had just written his book on Woke Inc., he was on some Fox News thing, he was talking about China issues, and I was like, hey, just to be clear, like, we're creating Strive, right? Like, you're not going out like the president. He's like, yeah, we're creating Strive. He's like, I made commitments, like, I'm not going to run, for president or any political office until 2020. That was what we originally thought. And I think he genuinely thought that, genuinely believed it. But I think based off a lot of the success that we had at Strive, and one of the reasons we co-founded Strive to revive the ideals of what I'd say is like, American free market capitalism is like American ideals that have been lost. That here in this country, the American dream is alive and well for folks that are going to work hard and make things happen. Capitalism is the greatest system known to humankind to raise people out of poverty. This nation is a nation that's a story of underdogs, not of victims. Like a lot of these narratives and these things that we talk about at Strive. And we got Strive off the ground, and we were fortunate enough to have a lot of success last year, and this message I think was resonating in a big way. I really think by the end of last year, he was just kind of frankly called to run for the presidency sooner than what he had anticipated. He gave me a call last, it was December or something like that, and I said, hey, we need to have a conversation. I said, conversation about what? He's like, I'm thinking about running for president. I was like, what are we talking about? We had a whole discussion about this before we started it. He's like, hey, a lot of success, I think that we're having. I think that, there's no better time than now. And when you're in a startup, volatility is just inherent in a startup. I don't know of another startup in history where one of the co-founders is left to go for president. So, that wasn't expected. But, at the end of the day, he kind of stepped away from the business, and he had to step away from the business, really true to our mission. That, we criticized everything to BlackRock, Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan, because these guys have said on multiple occasions that they would love to be president, they just don't want to run to be president. And so therefore they kind of act like the president sometimes from their position of power, BlackRock and JP Morgan, using other people's money to effectuate change in these issues. That's why Vivek stepped away. So strive to be true to our mission of really unleashing the potential of American free market capitalism. There are certain problems that capitalism should not solve. There are a lot of these other contested issues that are better solved by the American population that can hold an elected official accountable and can vote people out of office. And so that's what he's now trying to solve issues, whether it's parental rights in Florida, whether it's transgender rights issues, whether it's election integrity laws issues that we say companies should stay out of. He's doing that. And I think he's genuine in terms of he wants to go out, he does want to solve these issues. And I've been very fortunate to go to great schools, great institutions. I know a lot of smart people. And I've always said, even before I co-founded Strive, that he was head and shoulders above everybody else, just from a raw intellectual horsepower standpoint. Even going back to high school, on my high school, we didn't have like a 4-point scale of GPAs. We just had straight averages out of 100, and they would post on the whole school to see the highest averages every single quarter by class. Vivek's average throughout high school was at 99%, where he literally got everything right in every single class. Most people who were valedictorian got like 94, 95 when they graduated. He was at 99, and I believe the only reason he wasn't at 100, he went to a Catholic Jesuit high school, and the religion department didn't believe in getting hundreds because only God was perfect. And so they were on the highest grade you could get, and religion was at 99, so that prevented him, I think, from having hundreds. So he has the raw intellectual horsepower, but he's combined that with, I think, just like an absolute dogged determinism, just to will things to happen and make things happen. And I think those two things, I mean, from a guy that had basically 0% awareness 9 months ago to, as recently as a month ago, was running second in a lot of polls in the national polls. And if you take Donald Trump out of the equation, I mean, running almost like neck and neck with DeSantis for second place, yeah, I think that he has, as good a chance as anyone to potentially win. I think that he's very genuine. When he talks about when like revive the ideals of what kind of set this American experiment off in 1776. I think constitutional rights, freedom of speech, open debates, dialogues, meritocracy, a lot of these things, I think he's passionate about. And I think that he's going to be a staying power in politics, for years to come. So I don't know if he's going to win this go around, but I think for years to come, he's going to be a force in American politics.
One final question, brief, or are we? Okay, I have one from a professor.
I'm probably going to ask the dumbest question, actually, because these questions have been so good. And I may have missed something that you said earlier about this, but I'm just curious, why did State Street, BlackRock, these big money managers turn to ESG if the amount of money that they're raising for ESG funds is so minuscule? Like, what's in it for them from a financial perspective?
What's in is the fees in a growth industry.
Even if it represents such a small share of their overall assets under management, it's still worth the trouble of promoting that they do these things?
The goal was to switch the mix of their funds over time. So when you have 98% of their funds they manage, you really have like low-fee passive index funds. That can be as low as charging 5 basis points. Like what that effectively means is like every $1,000 that you invest into a company, they're going to charge $5 a year to manage it. And if it's since a year's to manage it. Whereas when you have these ESG funds, they're charging 3x that amount. So they can get 3x the amount of fees for effectively having the exact same fund. There's nobody else to work. A lot of people are slapping ESG labels on the almost the exact same fund. And so if you can switch that mix over time from 2% of your assets to 20% of your assets, then all of a sudden that's going to be like a massive driver of growth and of revenue for years to come. So that was the incentive. And really until a year or two ago, the ESG funds had massive inflows into them because they were selling this narrative that you could do better for the world and you could increase your investment returns, both of which I just believe are intellectually flawed and data studies.
So it did look like that was actually the right strategic direction to go into, because it looked like there was more of a rebalancing towards these ESG funds until recently.
I mean, if it was true, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, that'd be great, right? If, you know, you're saving the world, you're doing good, oh, and by the way, you're making more money doing it, like, that sounds great, right? The problem is that you weren't making more money, and also in a lot of cases, like, you weren't doing good by the world, when all of a sudden you're importing your values, and it's, again, whether it's election integrity laws, whether it's criminal rights issues, whether it's transgender rights issues, like you name it, these are things that most of these companies should not necessarily be getting involved with or having to take positions on, and therefore it's actually not creating value, it's actually more value destructive. And an otherwise divided kind of democracy that we live in, when you know, kind of last thing, you know, when Lexington Tocqueville was here, he said, you know, most sort of like fragmented democracies, they last about one generation, unless they're these sort of like apolitical sanctuaries that can kind of bind otherwise diverse people together. And I think here, like, over time, it's kind of interesting that 1776 was a year when, you know, the American Revolution happened. It was when Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations. And those are two things that have allowed this country to thrive, being independent of one another. We have our American democracy on one side, capitalism on the other. We believe that we should let the capital markets be able to have companies that are just true and authentic to their mission, not getting involved in these contested public policy objectives that are better less for all citizens to be able to have votes on. Because otherwise, you know, we go back to this monarchical society that we kind of cast off 250 years ago. We have this small group of kind of CEOs and asset managers that are making decisions on these contested public policy issues.
Thank you for the plug for de Tocqueville, because we're studying democracy in America in one of my classes, and now it's been reinforced that it has to be taken seriously, not just because I said so. At this time, would you join me in thanking our two colleagues? We have one or two places left for dinner if you would like to join us at the Colgate Inn at 6:30. Just come up to me and talk to me.